I think Labour effectively want to blame Brexit voters, and whenever you blame a voter, that never really goes down very well.
Kemi Badenoch's put forward this strong retail offer of a cut to stamp duty.
But really they need to seize on these big set-piece opportunities to set out a vision and look at what the future of conservatism looks like and really paint a picture that differentiates them from what we are likely to see, which is more tax on the Labour side.
From CapEx, this is The Capitalist. I'm Marc Sidwell, and my guests today are John Oxley, a writer and strategist, and Robert Midgley, a communications advisor who's previously worked at 10 Downing Street. Welcome both. Now, the B word is back in Westminster's vocabulary. Next month, the Office for Budget Responsibility is expected to cite Brexit, alongside COVID, as a key factor behind its looming downgrade of UK productivity growth. For Labour, it's a politically convenient narrative. Blame the Conservatives and Nigel Farage for economic underperformance and justify a round of tax rises without owning the consequences. But the question remains, will the public buy it? John, last year at the autumn budget, Rachel Reeves talked a lot about black holes in the economy, blaming the Conservatives for the tax rises that she brought in. She promised she wasn't going to have to do it again. Now she's going to have to, and this time round, she's blaming it on Brexit. Is this just getting her excuses in and not facing the consequences?
It's very convenient for the government. I think we see all governments do this. The Conservatives themselves made about 14 years of hay out of the financial crisis and a note saying there's no money left. And one of the things that is helpful for the government, if you look at the polling, there's a real sense that a majority of people now see Brexit as a mistake or as something that has been handled badly. But there's a question, I think, of how much the public really go along with these excuses. I think they understand them, but there's still always a pressure on the government of the day to get things right and improve them. And that's going to be the real test for Rachel Reeves in this budget. Brexit gives a bit of political cover now, but I don't think it does in 2 years' time if the economy is still struggling and people are still feeling the effects of it, regardless of what they think the causes were.
And Robert, I mean, John says there that Brexit with people has become increasingly unpopular, but of course with Reform UK voters, Nigel Farage supporters, they're still very much passionately convinced that Brexit was the right choice. This is intended to sort of blunt the rise of reform a little bit, perhaps, and put some pressure on Farage. Do you think that's going to cut through?
So I think Labour effectively want to blame Brexit voters, and whenever you blame a voter, that never really goes down very well. And they're sort of blaming voters, saying, well, it's all your fault that we have to do all these tax rises. I think John was quite right in saying that, ultimately Brexit, doesn't matter how you sort of take it, those voters do count. A lot of them have gone off to various other parties now. And like you said, it's all tied back to Nigel Farage. And it's very convenient for the government to blame him because they are playing that political game, because he's surging in the polls and it's gaining quite a lot of momentum. So it's very easy to sort of pin Brexit on him because he led the campaign on it, but also because he's basically the opposition at the moment. And whether this economic argument may swing in favour of Labour, ultimately the voters don't like being blamed for something that they struggle to understand, and they rarely see in their day-to-day lives where their money is going to.
And John, I mean, on Brexit, Labour, of course, has brought in a sort of reset with the EU of a kind. They've certainly sort of renegotiated bits of the deal, which is supposed to have improved things. They've also done new trade deals with the US, with India. All of this ought to suggest that things are a little better on the Brexit front now, but even by their own lights. Do you think this is just sort of confused messaging for them? This sort of plays against it to sort of suddenly be blaming Brexit now?
I think what it points to is a real problem for the government, that if they are going to be saying Brexit drove this, Brexit is the reason we're having to make these changes, there's a real question of, and what are you going to do about it? Particularly from the people out there, Labour supporters, Lib Dem voters, Green voters, whose answer to that is, well, why aren't we going to reverse it? And I think it puts Labour in a difficult position where all they are effectively saying is Brexit was bad, it is going to continue to be bad, but all we can do is try to make the best of it, which then hampers their own responses. Those things like the trade deals makes it hard for them to really argue we are doing a good job on this issue, when the question is always there, well, if it is the cause of all these problems, why aren't you being bolder? And we talk a lot about the reform voters and how much they sort of still identify around support for Brexit. But the same is true on the opposite end of the political spectrum. There are a lot of voters out there, a lot of left-leaning voters, some centre voters, who are still very pro-EU. And what there is very little of in the middle is people who particularly care about the course that the Labour government is charting through the middle of this, through the middle of this problem. There are very few people who are out there sort of really passionately in favour of a trade deal with India, say, and sort of forming their votes or their worldview around that.
Yeah, and that's they're sort of caught from both sides, as you say. It's a good point. We've had Robert just drop out there. Hopefully he'll come back. I think he's having some trouble with his line. John, before we move on, just one more thing I wanted to ask about this. We've talked about Labour and reform. We haven't really talked about the Conservatives. Now, of course, at their conference, they were very consciously setting themselves up as the party of fiscal responsibility. Whether people believe that after recent years remains to be seen. But they're very much focusing on this because I think they think the polling shows that on the economy is still their greatest strength with the public. Kemi Badenoch's put forward this strong retail offer of a cut to stamp duty. Do you think they are going to be in a good position? Kemi still gets, after all, to make the response to the budget as the leader of the opposition, that they're going to be in a good position to come across as the responsible ones as Rachel Reeves stands up and announces all these tax rises?
They should be, and it should be a real focus for the Conservatives in the next month or the next few weeks of building out what their vision for the fiscal future is. I think one of the things that we've seen is the Conservatives wanted to take time, but really they need to seize on these big set-piece opportunities to set out a vision and look at what the future of conservatism looks like and really paint a picture that differentiates them from what we are likely to see, which is more tax on the Labour side, and the reform approach, which is very confused and fiscally unbalanced. The problem they have with that is the most immediate argument which Labour will put forward is reform is going to be a Liz Truss budget on steroids, which the Conservatives have that baggage that both on overall high level of taxation and spending that they ultimately delivered, but at the same time, when they tried to row back from that in the mini budget, it was a political and economic disaster. So it is really hard to try and shake that baggage, but if they are going to do it, the opportunity is there with budgets when you get these big set pieces, and as the opposition, the formal opposition, regardless of what the polling's saying, you are the party that needs to respond, but you have to do it credibly, and that's very hard for the Conservatives at the moment.
Yeah, we will wait to see how that goes. Well, let's move on to our next topic, another area where the Conservatives have issues with credibility, but Labour does as well. The great housing catch-up. The UK is short more than 6 million homes, an extraordinary deficit that stems from decades of political hesitation and chronic underbuilding. Both public and private development collapsed in the latter half of the 20th century and never recovered. Governments continue to dodge the politically awkward task of building where demand is highest, fearing local backlash. Now, The Times reports a new landfill tax may push up construction costs further. Labour is moving on planning and trying to do things to turn this around, but solving the crisis does mean confronting tough questions. Can local opposition be overcome? and who will lead the charge for bold, long-term building. John, there's been a new panorama out this week. Let's see if I can get the title right. Can the government win the race to 1.5 million homes? This is this target that they've set themselves. They're going to build 1.5 million new homes by 2029. It is not looking good. Under Angela Rayner as the housing minister, they got off to a very slow start. Steve Reed's in there now saying build, baby, build. But do you think they can really do it?
I think it's going to be very, very difficult. As you allude to in your introduction, this is a problem that is 40, 50, 60 years in the making, and is the result of failing to hit those targets for many, many years. And getting there quickly means really reinvigorating this sector in terms of both the regulatory agenda. There is a lot of talk about planning, a lot of campaigns. We see Conservative YIMBYs, we've seen Labour YIMBYs really push arguments around planning. But effectively, that is only stage one of the bottleneck, and we will see what Labour do on that. But even then, you've got questions of, do we have enough workers to build the houses? Do we have the construction materials? Do we have enough bricks to build the houses? How does this flow into infrastructure demands, sewerage demands? It is a very, very hard problem. And what you see is almost every part of that journey is paved with political opposition. So I'm very doubtful. I think Labour have reasonably good intentions, but I'm not sure they have the stomach for the political fight on housing that is going to get these big numbers of homes delivered. And the fact is, if you've not delivered a good chunk of those in the first year or the second year, you are never going to do that, because we're never going to jump to building 700,000-800,000 homes in a year. So if you don't get most of the progress done in the first 3 years of government, that's a target you're just not even going to come close to.
Robert, good to have you back with us. Hope you can hear me. Great. What do you think Labour should be doing if they're serious about cutting through the blockers and getting Britain building again?
So I think housing is obviously a huge problem in the UK in general. They're planning to build all these towns and new villages all over the place on greenfield sites. And obviously I think that they should build on brownfield sites. For example, where I'm from in Yorkshire, we have so many of these sort of new towns sprouting up, all these new housing estates all over, and they're all completely empty. There's no services nearby, there's no doctors, there's no shops, and so they're just sat there all empty. I think a big question is, who is living in all these houses? Because we're not really sure, and you could tie it to the immigration argument and all of this stuff, but who's actually planning to move into all these houses that have no services in? And I think it's a really, really big question. And also it branches out to affordability, who can afford to move into these new houses, because the younger generation cannot move into these houses, and the people who are already on the property ladder, they don't want to sell it because housing prices have gone down, so they're sort of stuck where they are. So there's quite a few issues there that just aren't cutting through.
Well, one of the big issues which you allude to there is building in the right place too. It's not just that we want homes, but we want them in the places where they can do the most for the economy and where the demand is the greatest. And above all, that means in London. Now, in London, they have a real problem, which is they have a 35% affordable homes target for all new developments. There have to be that many new homes in the development. And the problem with that, good as it sounds, is that it makes those developments in the capital, where it's so expensive to build now, just basically uneconomic. And all the evidence is that even if you build more expensive homes, that sort of creates a sort of flow in the market where filtering that people move down and actually does free up cheaper housing as well. So now there is talk that Steve Reed is going to put pressure on the Mayor of London in order to bring down this 35% target on affordable housing. Robert, do you think that makes sense?
I mean, you can call it affordable housing all you want, but the fact is that the London average wage is still sat at, what, 35k? On 35k, you can't access that affordable housing. Affordable housing, that access starting point is around 60 to 70k that you need to have an income for. So it's a non-starter. These people who are on that London average wage are basically stuck in renting properties in private accommodation.
John, what's your take? Do you think the affordable homes guarantee is an important thing to push on?
I think when you look at the realities is that 35% of a small number of homes built is probably worse than 15 or 20% of a good number of homes built. But when zoom in on this, what you're effectively seeing is, we talk a lot about left and right YIMBYism. This is a form of left NIMBYism, which you see in London, where people are just as opposed to building around them as you see in some of the rural Tory areas. But that gets framed through this anti-developer line. And I think the reality is, when you look at the economics of housing, the best thing you can do is just build something and get people living in them. And if you look at some of the examples from the US and from New Zealand, getting homes built benefits everyone. And the more impediments you have to that around things like affordability are just making it harder, making the margins tighter for developers. And particularly while land prices are high and planning permission is hard to obtain, it's another thing that just squeezes both their willingness to build, but also across the industry. It's about the capital demands, and when projects are very expensive and you're relying on the flows of capital, it really restricts us to a few developers and makes it much harder for there to be a free market in getting houses built.
That's fascinating. Well, let's hope that one way or another the government can actually make some progress on its housing targets. Finally today, as the centenary of Margaret Thatcher is marked, it's easy to forget just how effective she was at capturing public attention. With crisp messaging and conviction, she dominated headlines in a pre-digital age, winning trust, even from critics. Today, the party leaders seem less confident. Keir Starmer lacks rhetorical punch, Kemi Badenoch suffers from low name recognition, and while Nigel Farage commands media space, including reaching the young on TikTok, he remains far more unpopular than not, and when it comes to a preferred Prime Minister, still loses to Keir Starmer. As John recently put it in an essay on post-literate politics, there's no use mourning that long-form manifestos are now drowned out in a sea of viral clips. Politicians must learn to compete in this age of short-form video. The real question is who can master the message and move the needle. John, could you just explain a little this idea of post-literate politics that you've written about, because it's a fascinating one.
Yes, and obviously I would recommend people go and read what is sadly a long-form article. But I think what we've seen recently is, and you look at stats across a number of things, fewer people are reading less, and as a result of that, we're seeing much more people paying attention to things like TikTok, things like Instagram Reels, these really short, punchy, new forms of communication, which are much more emotive in their impact, far less bogged down with facts and explainers. And this is as much of a challenge to political communication as television was before that, or as radio and the rise of newspapers and printing has been historically. It's a change in the way people take their information and what they're looking for, and you've got to engage with that rather than trying to resist a tide.
Robert, I see you nodding there. I mean, you've worked inside Number 10 on some of these communication issues. Do you think the Conservatives in opposition are learning this new language of communication at all?
I think they're slowly catching up, yes. I was speaking on another podcast recently about this, and we're very much in a sort of convergence phase of media. You look back to, say, World War II, when you used to get your news headlines from the newspapers or radio, and you think about that press office structure that's been set up in political parties for the past 200 years. They've had that same structure, and suddenly this digital kid has come along in the past 10, 15 years, and things have just moved rapidly through a revolution. You think of, 10 years ago even, we didn't really have square videos yet. Then we had, 6 years ago, they all came along, and Instagram came along, and suddenly we went from like a widescreen video to square. Now we're looking at vertical, and that's only been in the past, I'd say, 3, 4, 5 years. So things have really, really changed, and with that is the communication methods. people's attention spans have gone down so much that people want that message within the first few seconds of a 10-second video. It's absolutely insane. And this is where Nigel Farage has really captured the sort of TikTok generation, because he's mastered that 30-second soundbite that offers that message, it offers that solution all in 10 seconds. And so that's what the Conservatives need to get a grasp of. We don't really see that from Kemi, and we certainly don't see that of Keir Starmer either. I mean, a lot of things that I see of Keir Starmer, he says words that don't really make up a sentence, and there's a lot of waffle there. You come away from it thinking, what did he just say? What was he trying to convey there? And that's where someone like Nigel Farage really cuts through. And like you said, we need to see that a bit more from Kemi, to see a bit more of her in general.
John, do you think there's a natural limit to this? I mean, Farage, it's true, is very good at this. He's doing very well on TikTok. He has an ability to sort of come across as very sort of relaxed and authentic. But at the same time, he is still very unpopular. I mean, he has 30% of the public or so that likes him, which is more than most politicians, but then he has like 60 plus percent who really don't like him at all. Can that communication skill get him over that hump, or is there a natural limit to what he can do with TikTok?
I think there's a natural limit. I think one of the things you really see about this sort of content is it's much more about reinforcement than persuasion. It is, confirming your views. It is supporting the views you already have. And TikTok and other apps skew very politically towards the sort of demographics who are more likely to be left-leaning. And I think one of the interesting sort of case studies here is if you look at Die Linke, the German sort of far-left party. They did very well in the recent federal elections off the back of a very strong TikTok campaign. And what we're starting to see now in the same way, Zach Polanski, his leadership campaign was run very well through those sort of videos. Since he took over, Green Party is putting out more of that as official content. Its poll numbers are rising. I think the thing with political communication is there is always a limit on who can you persuade. But what this is good for is motivating those people, getting those people who are your target audience to really care about what you're doing, and ultimately to get them to go out and vote. And that's where the difference is made.
Robert, do you think it's true that social media is going to encourage these younger generations to vote? Because, of course, British politics has become rather captured by older generations. Pensioners are much more likely to vote. Younger people are eligible to vote. And, of course, that age is moving down thanks to Labour. But those generations really don't tend to vote, even if they're politically engaged on TikTok. Do you think that might change?
I think it will change, because I think politicians now have moved away from that sort of commentary phase. And it's an advice I'd give to a lot of political people going into that realm as well, is that you can engage in the commentary, but you're just being a part of that conversation. You're not leading the conversation. What you should be doing is offering that solution. You should acknowledge there's a problem, understand people, and then offer a solution to help capture that imagination, to get people talking about it. And then once you've captured them, you take them on a journey, and then you say, okay, now it's time to vote for me. And that's how to sell, how to win over time.
Yeah, and John, just before we finish up, I mean, the big problem for the Conservatives under Kemi Badenoch is just getting some attention. She still has, better say than some of her rivals within the party, but still surprisingly low name recognition. Do you think that's just something that is very hard for her to cut through, and perhaps with the state of the public mood about the Conservatives, better to just take some time? Or is there something she can do to have the public actually notice that she exists and think of her as a sort of potential alternative to Labour?
I think it is hard. And in particular, when you've just gone into opposition, most people, the reality is most people aren't even thinking about who they're going to vote for at the next election. And one of the things that we forget about, we talk about the rise of Reform. Reform as a party is very young, but Nigel Farage has been in this game pretty much my entire lifetime, building up his brand. So I think it is very hard for a new leader of the opposition to break through and really have that name recognition. But I think there is a lot more that the Conservatives could be doing as a party. And I think one of the interesting things about the new media is it probably shouldn't just be about the leader. You need to think a lot of what's persuasive, particularly when you look from an advertising point of view, is things like user-generated content, stuff that doesn't feel like it's coming from a political party. Is people are more receptive to it. They trust it a bit more. They don't think, what is this leader of a party trying to tell me? So I think the big thing for the Conservatives is that there's a lot of opportunity there because people aren't paying a huge amount of attention. You can try things out, see what sticks, see what works, and use that to build up your armory ahead of, when we get into 2028 and suddenly everyone's starting to think about the election.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, opportunities there, and will we see the Conservatives encouraging TikTok dances in favour of cuts to stamp duty? We'll wait and have to see. But Robert Midgley and John Oxley, thank you both very much. Make sure you're subscribed to our daily email briefings. Go to capex.co. That's capx.co. I'm Marc Sidwell. Goodbye.